The views expressed on Science for the People are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
This week on Science for the People, we're talking about intelligence. Later on, we'll check out whether smartphone use can affect intelligence with Nathan Barr. But first up, we're going to talk about IQ, intelligence, and creativity. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Science for the People. I'm Desiree Schell and I'm here with cognitive psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott is the scientific director of the Imagination Institute in the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where he conducts research on imagination, creativity, and play, and teaches the popular undergraduate course, Introduction to Positive Psychology. He's also the host of the Psychology Podcast, co-founder of the Creativity Post, and author of the column Beautiful Minds for Scientific American. He's here to talk about his book, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. Great to have you back, Scott.
Oh, thanks, Desiree Schell. It's great to be back.
Now, this is your second time on the show, and I invited you on a while back to talk about IQ testing, but as we were talking, I very quickly realized that we needed a far longer piece to really dig into the concept of intelligence. So is that how you feel? Like most people don't really understand how terrifically broad the idea of intelligence is?
I do feel that way. I feel that even within my own field of psychology, there are some researchers, not going to mention names, but some researchers who don't really go beyond a very narrow view of intelligence.
Well, the subheading of your book, Ungifted, is Intelligence Redefined. So maybe explain that title.
Yeah, the title Ungifted is not my way of denouncing the field of gifted education. I'm a big proponent of gifted and talented education. What it is it's mostly a commentary on how I felt personally growing up in special education under our current education system, where we have certain expectations and we treat people certain ways depending on the labels that they have. So that was like, the personal aspect. So this book, it was my attempt to weave my personal experiences with my, I hope, objective investigation of the science behind human potential and IQ, creativity, human achievement. So it really was my attempt to integrate all these various perspectives.
And it is sort of the exploration, although it is very personal as well, it's an exploration of all the neurological and psychological and genetic research on intelligence.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of really exciting research in this field that I think is just not known by the general public. I mean, I'm just really passionate and excited about just sharing this stuff,
Yeah, and that's why I wanted you to come on again, because you were fantastic last time, too.
Thanks.
So,
how am I doing so far?
You are fantastic.
Score.
Now, because we are humans, and humans like to compartmentalize and label and measure things, intelligence is one of the things that we've tried to measure. So maybe can we talk about the history of IQ testing? How did that all start?
Sure. It didn't start out as an intelligence test or an IQ test. It was never framed that way. Alfred Binet, who was a Frenchman, at the start of the 20th century, he was commissioned to create a test that would differentiate between those who were in need of remediation in school versus those who would profit, just regular normal profiting from education. And he did create a test that did a pretty good job differentiating those who needed more help to learn and from those who didn't. It was never called an intelligence test. He was very clear that this test should never be viewed as a student's potential. He said, I don't really care about what came before or what will come after. My only goal is in this moment to give people the help that they need. When it was translated overseas and Americans got a hold of this test, well, it became a whole different beast. It became an intelligence test.
Well, and why were they trying to test IQ specifically at that point?
It wasn't even an IQ test. So, IQ is a metric, is a ratio of your mental age versus your chronological age. So if you're a 10-year-old and you score on this test like 40-year-olds do, your IQ is going to be very, very high. If you're 40 and you score like 10-year-olds, you will probably be mentally disabled according to these tests. So that's the idea behind the IQ. That wasn't the IQ quotient. That metric was not invented when when Alfred Binet created his first test. That didn't exist. Again, he decreed the notion of a summary score. He decreed the notion that you could summarize someone's intelligence with one score. In fact, he was all about looking at all the different fascinating ways that people can display their intelligence. And he looked at the extent to which you could be hypnotized. Right. He looked at imagination, which didn't make the final cut in America, which, he looked at memory. He looked at calendar calculators, prodigies, things. He was just at savants. He just he was all about breadth of human cognition. And that whole spirit upon which that test was originally designed was totally abused for a large part of the 20th century when it came over to America.
So can you tell me the IQ test that is in use now, what does that test exactly?
So contemporary IQ tests are grounded in a model called the CHC model. I guarantee you no one in the general public has ever heard of this. So the CHC model views intelligence as a hierarchy of cognitive abilities. At the very, very top sits this general intelligence factor. So those who score very high at this top of this hierarchy are generally smart people. So across situations and across contexts, they seem to learn new information that's complex very quickly. When you go one level beneath that top level, you get about 9 specific abilities. You get cognitive abilities. You get math ability. You get verbal ability. You get visual spatial. Can you mentally rotate things in your head? You get memory. How many things can you hold in your head at one time? Working memory. And then when you go one level beneath, you get like upwards of 70 different kind of abilities that you can measure on these tests. That third level at the bottom, I think a lot of very thoughtful, well-meaning IQ administrators really emphasize that bottom level to really get to know the student and to use it to inform educational assessment. So the tests today are used for a lot of good purposes. They are used. I don't think a lot of people realize that. People are still like stuck in like IQ, one score. But I would say modern IQ, contemporary IQ administrators and school psychologists emphasize the multitude of human intelligence.
Well, and the IQ score as it's used now, it's also used as a predictor of future success.
I mean, by who?
By the administrators, from what I understand.
I mean, people in society at large are the average person on the street, you say IQ, they still think of the one number, right? Mm-hmm. So you see like people, like you see on Huffington Post every other day, it's like little genius Mary has just been inducted into Mensa. Right. So IQ smarter than Hawking and Einstein combined or something. Well, look, Einstein never took an IQ test. That's just total BS. And also, it is totally unfair to call a 10-year-old who does well on an IQ test a genius. Okay? That is totally unfair to the child, puts unnecessary pressure on the child. And so in an educational context, in terms of gifted education, there are some educators that still rely on the IQ test as a predictor of giftedness, and they really almost exclusively rely on that. Thankfully, most gifted and talented programs are breaking away from that model. They're looking at other kinds of abilities. A few rogue, rebellious gifted and talented programs actually look at creativity, gosh forbid. But there still are, some very traditional people in this country that are still relying on very outdated notions of human intelligence.
Well, that being said, is there a correlation between higher IQ scores and academic achievement? Oh,
very much so. Yes. I've published a paper, which I am happy to share with your readers if you do show notes or anything like that. I published a paper showing that IQ tests are extremely, extremely highly correlated with academic achievement across the board. So if you look at like a global IQ score as a summary score of all of your ability for all these cognitive abilities, and you compare it to your ability to do well in general across lots of different kinds of tests, standardized tests of achievement, you find they're extremely highly correlated. So that is true. But it creates an interesting situation in our educational culture because, one way of thinking about it, you could say, how often do we say this? But it kind of biases, our educational culture is biased towards those who are high IQ. Now, intelligence researchers would love to conceptualize that as, oh, we're biased towards intelligent people. So what's wrong with that? We're just biased against stupid people. But I don't see it like that. I don't see the situation like that because I don't equate IQ with intelligence. As the full richness of intelligence. So the way I see it is that we are literally stereotyping and limiting possibility of students who may have some difficulties in some of these kinds of cognitive skills, which is also going to make it difficult for them to do well in standardized tests, but does not mean that they can't totally kick ass in lots of other things.
This is Science for the People, and I'm talking to cognitive psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman about his book, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. And so that really brings us to the premise of your entire book, that being a success isn't only impacted by IQ. So what other kinds of things would have an impact then?
Yeah, and I would say not only success, but something else that really interested me is, again, gosh forbid, that we care about individual flourishing and well-being. We talk about publicly recognized success as like that's the only thing that matters in life, but I really, I could have called the subtitle of my book. It is called, the multiple paths to greatness, but I was thinking cheekily in the paperback version, but they said no, we can't change the cover. I wanted we can't do that. Multiple paths to like individual flourishing or personal fulfillment.
It's very long.
Yeah, I know. Multiple paths to fulfillment. That's not that. That's not longer than greatness. You just swap out greatness, stick in flourishing, done.
I am not arguing with your publisher. So what are some of the personality traits and abilities that could have an effect on success?
Yes. Okay. So one of my favorite studies is from the 50s by the great creativity researcher E. Paul Torrance. He looked at all these elementary school kids and he followed them up 30 years into adulthood. He wanted to see what were the best predictors of creative achievement as well as personally meaningful creative expression. And he found that the skills and the abilities that mattered most were not scholastic academic skills. So IQ was not what gave creativity its special sauce. Standardized achievement scores, GPA, these things were not what gave creativity its unique flavor. What he found is that the extent to which these kids had fell in love with a future image of themselves, or they fell in love with a dream when they were young, that was a better predictor than IQ of lifelong creative achievement, as well as a whole wide range of other characteristics that he calls the beyonder characteristics. So he calls these kids the beyonders, those who 30 to 50 years later went beyond academic performance. They really changed their field. They really were considered the leaders in their field. And these lists of characteristics include things like persistence, high energy, a love of work. So, grit, elbow grease. You just love working. You're like, I love getting my hands dirty. In addition to loving what they do. So that was also important. I really like this one. They found that one of the characteristics that was really important, was whether or not they felt as though they were okay being a minority of one. So he asked students in elementary school, are you okay if you have an idea in the classroom and everyone else in that classroom just laughs at you, disagrees with you, including the teacher? And the students who said, yes, I'm okay with that, it was a better predictor than IQ of lifelong creative achievement and personal fulfillment.
That makes so much sense. So much.
So isn't it crazy that we do so much testing and something as little as that can be a better predictor?
Well, how about passion? Because you talk about passion in the book.
I'm not too bothered by passion. No, I'm joking.
Well, what is that exactly? How are we defining that?
Well, a lot of people would think of passion probably. Well, how do you think of passion? When I used to ask you, what's the difference between interest and passion? What do you think the difference is?
Passion is far more obsessive, in my opinion.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's really interesting that you said that. Because I distinguish between, and a lot of researchers in positive psychology, including the famous psychologist Wallerand, who's Canadian, distinguishes between obsessive passion and harmonious passion. He argues the difference between interest and passion in general is that interest is like I like playing basketball, whereas passion is I am a basketball player. Right. So passion is integrating something into the core of your identity, whereas interest is just a more ephemeral, fleeting a motivation to approach something. So that's, first of all, how he distinguishes between interest and passion. But within passion, he distinguishes between obsessive passion and harmonious passion. So obsessive passion is the kind of passion where the passion controls you. You're not in control of the passion. You're usually doing it for some sort of contingency, like a good grade, or a kiss from your grandma on the cheek, or a gold star, money, notoriety. You see a lot of, did you see the movie Black Swan? Mm-hmm. She was obsessively passionate about her activity. Harmoniously passionate individuals, research shows that it's a much more direct and healthy, mentally and physically healthy route to high achievement. So, and creativity and flow. So harmonious passion is when you're in control of your activity. You feel like the activity that you're engaging in is you're doing it for the sake of the love of it for itself, no contingencies attached, and it's something that makes you feel good about yourself. It's something you can integrate into your identity in a healthy way. People who are obsessively passionate have not integrated their activity, whether it's music, art, whatever it is. Or dance. They've not integrated it in a healthy way into their identity. But harmoniously passionate people, that activity is a part of them. It's what makes them feel good about themselves, and it's in accord with their authentic self.
Well, now, how can that impact success? And I guess, how would you research that?
Well, there are really interesting studies showing a whole pathway of links leading all the way up to performance, and it goes all the way back. You start out with harmonious passion. Harmonious passion leads to a certain kind of learning mindset called a mastery mindset, which is the most conducive to learning. If you enter a new learning environment and you have a mastery mindset where you say, "Oh, I'm just here to learn. I'm just here to grow." As opposed to I'm here to outperform others, or I'm here to avoid challenges so I don't look stupid. People with harmonious passion have the mastery mindset. And then that mastery mindset leads to higher levels of deliberate practice, something Erickson has studied in great depth. K. Anders Erickson. Deliberate practice, really effortful, learning from feedback, really increasing your strengths and remediating for your weaknesses. And then higher levels of deliberate practice lead to higher performance. But it's a whole chain of events that you want to start with harmonious passion to set it off.
Well, you mentioned deliberate practice. How about that phrase, it takes 10,000 hours to master a field? Is that based in reality?
That's bunk, my friend.
I knew it was bunk. I knew it.
That's bunk. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, and he coined something called the 10,000 hour rule. Which was not what a term that K. Anders Erickson, who actually did the research, ever used himself. And even Erickson, in his own papers recently, has spoken out and said that is a gross misrepresentation of my work. Even I admit that in my original study, 10,000 hours was only an average. It's a 10,000 hours average. It's averaged across all fields, across all people, which basically tells you nothing.
Right.
It don't tell you shit. What is informative is look at different fields, have different peak ages and different amounts of practice required, Okay, so the amount of practice required to be a good dancer or a good basketball player, a good gymnast is different than to be a good mathematician. Being a mathematician is different than being a good creative writer. You can be a creative writer, a great creative writer. You can have 30, I've done this research with my colleague James Kaufman, who's a total legend in the creativity field. And we found that there was huge variability in creative writing greatness. We found that at the very least, people had their best work 20 years after, they've been trying to practice in this field and have been publishing. Not 10 years, 20 years. There's great variability depending on the field. And then within the field, there's great variability. There's some people who come and it just comes so naturally to them and they just burst out on the scene. And like Chrissy Wellington, I think won amazing race after like 1 year of practicing. She just had this amazing, I guess you could say, talent for it. But there are those that through hardships, through there are lots of reasons or impediments that it could take someone a lot longer to accomplish something, but they still do it someday. So I just don't like to get too bothered with all these rules. Even Gladwell has retracted his statement.
Today on Science for the People, I'm talking to Scott Barry Kaufman, cognitive psychologist and author of Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. Now, you mentioned talent. Now, obviously, talent has something to do with success. Some people are just innately good at certain things, right?
No, I don't. I think that people don't have a good understanding of what innate means. People think of innate and they think that it means just pre-existing at birth. And we know the way human development works. That's just not how human development works. All talents are developed. There's nothing in the genetic code that can allow for the fully functioning, fully formed traits to just pop up from birth. Michael Jordan didn't pop out dunking from the free throw line at birth. That would be cool, but I don't think he's capable of doing that. So it does require intense development. What innateness means in the cognitive science literature has a different meaning. It means the capacity to learn. So we may have people may differ in their innate facility to soak up knowledge in something. That is true. And we do know that genes do play some role in facilitating the rate of acquisition of something. So you can view talent as the rate of acquisition. How quickly we tend to say people who are really talented are those who go up the learning curve at a much faster rate than someone else. But that doesn't mean that all those components were all existing there at birth. It's always a combination of resources, of support, of engagement, passion, practice. You find these prodigies who appear to have amazing talents that seem to come from nowhere. What you find is they're practicing 10 hours a day. They love it. They love what they're doing. This is why in my book, I define talent as a passion and proclivity for learning the rules of a domain. That's how I define talent in my book.
Well, you mentioned genetics and the fact that there isn't, a specific gene linked with specific traits necessarily, not in terms of passion and talent and such. But can you talk about the multiplier effect and how that works?
Absolutely. So we may have certain genes that give us slight advantages in youth for certain things. So imagine like you have genes that make you slightly taller than everyone else at age 6. By the way, this was me. I was tall for my age. I just stopped growing after age 10, but basically I was like really tall, young, and they picked me. I was the center of the basketball team. I got all these opportunities. I had dreams of NBA stardom, all this stuff, but all because I had a slight height advantage. Well, look, I eventually stopped growing. Kobe Bryant, came to our school and, and then it was game over.
That part of the book was great.
Thank you. It's, this is game over. There's no way Scott Barry Kaufman is gonna, outperform Kobe Bryant. But, he can't write blog posts like I can, to be fair.
That's okay. Well, let's talk about talent a little bit more. Now, there's a lot that we can learn about talent from the research around prodigies, right?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that when we look at extreme manifestations of talent, we can learn a lot about how talent operates in all of us, because talent is obviously in a bell-shaped sort of distribution. So, although it actually depends on what talent domain we're talking about. So, talent in creativity actually involves the combination of lots of traits. So it tends to not be normally distributed. It tends to be a lot of very few people at the top and most people, average. So it's interesting. It depends on what you look at. But when you look at prodigies, you find that they don't tend to stand out particularly in creativity or leadership or the kinds of traits that or kind of talent domains that require lots of different traits. They tend to stand out in one circumscribed ability. So a visual art prodigy will have an amazing capacity to draw lifelike figures at an early age, or a music prodigy can just play things from memory. For instance, prodigies appear to have an amazing memory for their domain, which seems to really aid in their learning of that domain.
So what does that tell us about us fairly normal folks?
Yeah, well, I think that you do see that, Ellen Winter said that prodigies are best characterized as having a rage to master. So I think that in terms of everyday folks, I think that we undervalue the important role of inspiration, of getting a passion or harmonious passion for an activity that we've integrated into our identity. When something is integrated into our identity like it is for prodigies quite naturally, when that happens to any of us, what you find is that at a subconscious level, we are learning about this thing. We're learning, we're just constantly learning about it. It's constantly always in the back burner because it's part of our identity. So anything in the environment that is relevant to that activity or the self, because it's now a part of our self, we're going to learn about it. And that's going to actually increase our chances, or it's going to increase our learning about this, even when we're not explicitly, deliberately doing so.
Okay, something else I really want to talk about, because we have talked about it on the show repeatedly. You say that self-regulation contributes to intelligence. So this is about the marshmallow test again.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's like a seminal study, where the kids, the 3 to 5 year olds who, were in the room and had the patience to not eat a marshmallow right away so they can get 2 marshmallows a little bit later. Those kids, you follow them up 10, 15 years later, their SAT scores were higher than those who ate the marshmallow right away. I think I would have eaten the marshmallow right away. I'm pretty sure even today, you stick a marshmallow in my face, I'm going to eat that right away.
So what you're saying
is I didn't, and I didn't.
Regulation is not necessarily the be-all and end-all.
No, it's not. And guess what? Their science is right. I didn't do well in my SATs. Yeah, you got me. I have very bad self-control. I don't do well my SATs, but I have a lot of self-discipline for things I love. I have a lot of imagination, probably an overactive imagination that gets me in trouble when I have to be forced to take a test in a room and ignore my imagination. This is the same as you see kids with ADHD, which I wouldn't be shocked if I had ADHD, first of all, but never been formally diagnosed. But you look at kids with ADHD and, they have trouble in environments like a school kind of environment or testing kind of environment where you have to force them to sit down and pay attention. Well, what you find in the brain is that they have an overactive brain network that I call the imagination brain network, which is a recent discovery in cognitive neuroscience, which we know is associated with envisioning your future self, with your remembering your personal memories, with making meaning from your life, from daydreaming, mind wandering, all these things. So what you're doing is you're taking people with overactive imaginations and you're forcing them to strip that entirely from their being. Well, guess what? It's not fun.
Well, and there's a very positive neurological value to daydreaming as well.
There is a positive value to daydreaming. I should also note, before cognitive scientists jump on my back, there is also a value to self-regulation. I'm not saying that there is no value to self-regulation. It is important, but here's the thing about self-regulation. This is what I want. This is the point I want people to really take away. That Clancy Blair, Adele Diamond, developmental psychologists, have written written beautiful papers to make this clear. Self-regulation is not only about self-control, okay? It's about regulating your emotions to obtain the goals you want. Now, that means being flexible, okay? It doesn't mean always waiting to eat the marshmallow. That's not what it means. It means, if you're starving right now, and it's not going to influence your goals at all, eat the damn marshmallow. Who cares? You're going to enjoy it. You're going to be happy. Who cares? Like, the thing is, I just don't get so hot and bothered by the marshmallow. It's like, now, of course, if you're trying to lose weight, there's a goal there now. Okay. It's probably good to exert some self-control because you want to achieve a longer term goal. But self-regulation to me is about, managing your emotions, managing your thoughts and your negative thoughts, the things that are getting in the way of your goals, your ruminations, your fears of failure. Okay. Self-regulation very much also includes regulating your the negative self-talk. Because that stuff really does generally get in the way. But, it also means embracing your passion. Okay. Self-regulation could also mean flexibly tapping into your passions, right? You're regulating your emotions so that you get in touch with your passions. To me, that's also self-regulation. I want to repeat once more. Self-regulation to me does not always mean self-control.
So many people love you right now.
Oh, great.
Honestly.
Great. I accept free marshmallows sent to the Positive Psychology Center.
Science for the People will be right back with more of Scott Barry Kaufman and his book, Ungifted, after this.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show exploring everyday life from a scientific perspective. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, or to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. So there's something that we haven't brought up yet that I found really interesting. There are definitely similarities between the way that we talk about giftedness and the way that we talk about learning disabilities, right?
There are similarities in the sense, I think that our culture tends to view them as separate. We tend to think people with learning disabilities are over here on the left-hand side and they're just disabled. From learning. We think they really need a lot of help in every area, that we really need their support to even just be remediated. And then on the other corner, are the gifted kids who don't need any help or support at all. They're just, they'll be fine on their own because they're just so darn smart. Well, none of that is true. Both of those notions are incorrect, characterizations of either kids with learning disabilities or kids with giftedness. So here's the truth. You ready for the truth?
Do it.
Okay. You can have a specific learning difficulty in something and still have an extraordinary strength in something else. These things can coexist. Absolutely. You find kids with autism, you find kids with dyslexia, schizophrenia, et cetera, who in a certain limited environment, they absolutely may have difficulties or struggle in certain areas. But you give them a chance in lots of other ways, and they are just absolutely brilliant. I recently saw a video at the world's first ever conference. It's actually just this weekend in New York City. The New York City's first ever conference on twice exceptional children. That's the phrase used to describe what I'm talking about. Those who simultaneously have a specific learning disability, but also some amazing strength in some specific area. They're called twice exceptional children. And I don't think many people, even educators, I give talks and I ask, how many people in this room have heard of twice exceptional children? And I hardly get any hands raised, and my head wants to explode. So anyway, so Joey Travolta, who's John Travolta's brother, runs a camp called Inclusion Films where he stars autistic children in this camp. And you watch, they are just so capable and creative if you give them the chance. To me, it's a lot of it is about giving people a chance and not, leading with all these preconceptions about what people can achieve.
Well, and that's what I mean by when we speak about learning disabilities and being gifted, almost in the same way. We talk about them as if they're static, unchanging states. traits?
I recently had my IQ tested many, many years later, all these heartaches and the pain of expectations based on my IQ results when I was 11 and I had an auditory learning disability. I was curious, where am I today? And my good friend, who I trust, I flew out to New Mexico. His name's Rex Young, and his team did a very lengthy evaluation. They scanned my brain. They gave me an IQ test. I felt very comfortable with them. And they found that my global total IQ score is uninterpretable.
What does that mean?
In the IQ test manual, when you have too much of a discrepancy between your verbal and your nonverbal intelligence, then it is unfair to interpret a total IQ score as having any meaning whatsoever. So it turns out that in my early childhood, I had some school psychologists that were perhaps incompetent, we shall say, to be nice, who are not aware of that fact, maybe didn't read the test manual. It turned out that I'm actually, in their words, verbally gifted. Woohoo! And visually, spatially, mentally impaired.
Fascinating. So how often does that happen, I wonder?
Well, with twice exceptional children or kids who have a learning disability and also can be gifted in some area, you find that discrepancies scatter between abilities is very common. In fact, even just looking at the gifted and talented population, just those kids, you find that it's much, much more the rule than the exception, that they have huge peaks and troughs all across their cognitive ability profile.
Okay, so this, I think, is one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview you about this topic, is because these are not just academic labels. These affect real people. So once you wind up with a label of gifted or learning disabled, what then?
Well, I think that it can create some good resource. It can have value in the sense that it can create a need, that it can give students resources that they need to thrive in the education system. There are clearly so many kids falling between the cracks when we have this education system that tries to get everyone up to the standard level. Well, when you try to get everyone up to a standard level, you have, the kids who are slower in getting to that level are going to be, are going to have trouble. And then those who are ready, for 3, 4, 5, 6 grades ahead, we're not giving many resources to them. So these labels to be fair, these labels can give kids the resources they need. Where the problem comes into play is when these labels are treated as enduring things that you never escape you. Like once you get the resources and once you reach the need, they should go away. They shouldn't be things that we use to judge someone's potential in life. We should only use it to assess individual need at a given moment in time. Nothing more, nothing less. I would view potential as and the labels as just an indication of what I call readiness for engagement. How ready is someone to engage in a particular curriculum or set of resources at this given moment in time? If they're ready, give it to them. If they're not, well, keep teaching them, keep trying to inspire them till they are. To me, that's all we need to do.
You're listening to Science for the People, and I'm talking to cognitive psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman about his book, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. Okay, so science has obviously moved past the idea that IQ is the sole measurement of intelligence, and your book is literally chock full of fascinating research in many, many areas that contribute to this idea of success or intelligence or greatness or what have you. But we still use IQ most frequently. And maybe that's not actual, administrators or academics who do that, but the public. Why do we keep using IQ?
Well, how is the public using IQ? Their talk about IQ, when they hear about someone's IQ, they tend to hold this model in their mind that IQ is genius, is the equivalent of genius, or the equivalent of brilliance. So people hold it in their mind. But I mean, are everyday people using IQ tests?
I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
I still quote those. I still had my son do an online IQ test, and yes, I know how ridiculous that is. I'm aware.
You should be whipped with a wet noodle for that.
But that's the thing. I think we use, and this is just my impression, that why we use IQ because it's easy, because it's easier to measure.
It's measurable
than a lot of those other.
So you're right. That is definitely one of the reasons, because it's easier to measure. But I mean, there are other things we can measure if we really are obsessed to measure things. We can, for instance, right now at the Imagination Institute where I work, we're currently have this goal of creating a new imagination test. So we're giving out $3 million for researchers to come up with new creative ways of measuring imagination. And there are remnants of these kinds of tests that currently exist, that even Paul Torrance did a lot of work on. But, going beyond things as like a static measure, like I'm not a big fan of these sort of judgment day thinking where you sit there and we're going to measure your potential in this judgment day, like right now. I'm a much bigger fan of measurement through, looking at individual growth over time. Looking at project-based learning, looking at portfolios and allowing students to choose themselves what aspects of themselves they want to highlight as they're most proud of. We really don't give that much of a chance. I wrote an article on reimagining college admissions, and it was very much this vision I have is very much a portfolio-based one where we really give kids a chance to show us their brilliance on their own terms.
And how do they do that?
If you start early enough, what you do is there is no such thing as tests. Everything is revisable. You constantly just have an ongoing record or portfolio of everything. And that child can select and highlight the things that they're most proud of that they've done, the most brilliant things over the course of their high school experience.
And so what's the goal?
Well, that's a good question. Right now, most people's goal in high school is to get into college. Right. But I think that, we can equip kids with the idea that there is more to life than getting into college, that there is a great importance and value to making some sort of humanitarian contribution to the society and the world at large, which is something that anyone can do, which is something that there is no IQ cutoff where you're not allowed to dream of bettering this world. It's not like, you go to the school psychologist, I don't want to live in the world where we go to the school psychologist and say, look, I have this dream of, curing world hunger. And they say, sorry, you're not gifted. Your IQ is not above 130. You can't do that. That's ridiculous. There's this group I work with called the Future Project, where they've created a position in the school called the Dream Director, where any student in the school can go to the Dream Director and say, this is my dream. And the Dream Director will immediately say, great, great. Let's see how we can get there. And they pair them up with a mentor and they get going. I'm much more of a go, atmosphere is what we need. We need that culture, this culture of inspiration, much more than our current model of the culture of evaluation.
So it's not that you want to redefine intelligence. It sounds like you want to change our culture.
Right. My main, thing right now is not to I'm not so hot and bothered about, how people define intelligence, but I think redefining potential, redefining what it takes, what people are capable of achieving given resources, opportunities, and just darn, confidence in their abilities. Just patting someone on the back and saying, you belong, whether it's like a woman, who's in a math class with all guys and just saying to that woman, you are extraordinarily talented in math, you belong. There's research showing that things as simple as that go such a long way. What people have said is that it appears in the STEM fields for women. It's what's called a chilly environment. This is a phrase that's used in the academic literature. There's still a chilly environment. If you can remove some of these barriers and make this world and education a much more open, encouraging place for boys and girls all across the ability spectrum, I think you'll see a lot more creativity come out of everyone.
Scott, you are just lovely. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's so much fun to talk to you.
And that was Scott Barry Kaufman, author of Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. And we've linked to it on our website at scienceforthepeople.ca.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show exploring everyday life from a scientific perspective. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, or to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. I'm Desiree Schell, and I'm joined by Nathaniel Barr, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Waterloo. He conducts a mixture of applied and theoretical research on topics spanning creativity, reasoning, memory, perception, and attention. He's the co-lead author of the recent study, The Brain in Your Pocket, evidence that smartphones are used to supplant thinking. Welcome, Nathaniel.
Thanks for having me on.
Maybe let's just start with you taking us through the study.
Sure. Well, we were inspired by a couple of distinct lines of research as well as some trends that we see in society. So we were first interested in this area simply because of the extent to which we see people using smartphones as an information source in their daily life. And in terms of how to set that up in a psychological experiment or study, we thought, let's connect this with a few things. So on one hand, we turned to work showing that people treat the internet like an extended mind. So philosophers have talked for a while the idea that we can offload our thinking, our cognitive processing to things in the environment. And Betsy Sparrow, a researcher, showed that people tend, when they're confronted with difficult problems, to think of the internet rather than try and solve the problems themselves. And then finally, we connected all of that with this idea that people are very cheap with their cognition. That is, they're lazy thinkers. And we can characterize people from being very lazy to less lazy. So what we simply did was look at people's cognitive styles, ranging from intuitive to analytic, or more colloquially, lazy to not so lazy. And we simply related that to how often they were looking for information via their smartphone.
So tell us about the methodology here. How many participants?
Yeah, so in our paper we have 3 different studies, and in all there's more than 600 participants. It's worth noting our participants both were a random sort of sample of adults throughout the United States, as well as university students here at Waterloo. And so the methodology we used was to employ well-studied and well-understood reasoning questions, and simply what the thing we're most interested in is that we presented people with problems in which there's an intuitive response that's incorrect. So the idea is that if they just go with their gut response and don't really think things through, they're going to get it wrong. Whereas if they reflect and think analytically about the problem, they're more likely to arrive at the correct answer. And so we looked at people's performance on such questions, which we see as a way of characterizing how cognitively lazy they are, and then we related that to their self-reported smartphone search engine use. And as we've discussed, what we find is that the people who tend to be more lazy in their thinking are more likely to rely on their smartphones for information in their everyday lives.
So what kinds of questions did you ask them to put them into those intuitive and analytical groups?
Yeah, so we used quite a variety. A lot of this is inspired by the work of Daniel Kahneman and some of these Amos Tversky, who have done this type of work throughout the years. So, for example, one thing we look at is base rate problems. So we pit stereotype information versus statistical information, and those people who more often rely on the stereotypes are more likely to be a bit lazier in their thinking when you relate it to other things. We also used a pretty wide-ranging heuristics and biases battery that's quite detailed, different types of items. But again, we're looking at problems in which we can identify people who are more prone to rely on these mental shortcuts generally, because the way we conceived of the smartphone was that it could be considered as a sort of tool to be used as a mental shortcut. Rather than having to memorize things yourself and retrieve them via cognitive effort, you can just simply type that into your phone.
Well, and how did you look at their smartphone use? You said it was self-reported?
Yeah, we simply just asked people how often they were using their smartphone for a variety of things. Our particular emphasis was on the search engine use, but we also asked them, for example, how often they were using it generally, how often they were using it for social media, how often they were using it for entertainment purposes. What's interesting is that our findings relating cognitive style to the smartphone use were very specific to the search engine use. That is, it didn't seem to matter if people were, checking Facebook or watching YouTube videos on their phone. That wasn't related to cognition. However, the extent to which they were searching for information via Google or some other search engine did seem to be related to that.
So, how do you, convert Celsius to Fahrenheit and such?
Yeah, we really think we're just sort of helping to open a door of a whole area of study here, and that we just sort of did this self-report study, but there's all kinds of interesting things that could be done where we actually track exactly what people are searching and sort of relate the specifics of what they're looking for to their cognitive style.
So does your study claim that people that are heavy users of smartphones tend to be less intelligent?
Well, we also included some sort of verbal intelligence measures, some numeracy measures, and we find the same type of relation there. So it does seem that the people who are less knowledgeable, perhaps you could say, or less intelligent, also seem to be behaving the same way as the lazier thinkers. Those things tend to be correlated as well. So yeah, in essence.
That's interesting because, again, the theme of this show is intelligence. So how are you defining intelligence then?
Yeah, so we use admittedly kind of coarse measures. We use like more or less a vocabulary test that's relatively widely used. We, being this is sort of interested, it's an online study we did, so they're relatively quick and easy measures we use. So specifically it's a word sum verbal intelligence test, the one, and then we have a numeracy test with a few items. So these are things that just sort of tap into how much these people tend to know. And if you think about our results, on one hand, someone could have made the opposite prediction as us, in that you might have expected people who have a lot of knowledge, as well as those who are very reflective and analytic in their thinking, might be using these smartphones to seek out new information.
Right.
Again, we didn't actually measure what people were searching, but we can make, I think, an indirect inference, although we can't be sure, that given that it's the lazier, less knowledgeable thinkers that are more often relying on these smartphones to find information, it might be the case that they're actually looking up things that could be relatively easy to learn or things that they've encountered before. So rather than using it as this device to extend our knowledge, we're using it to sort of maintain some requisite level of functioning.
This is Science for the People, and I'm talking to Nathaniel Barr, co-lead author of the recent study, The Brain in Your Pocket, Evidence that Smartphones Are Used to Supplant Thinking. Let's be extra clear. We're talking about correlation, not causation, right? Like heavy smartphone use also hasn't been proven to make you less intelligent, right?
Yes, definitely. That's a very important point. One that we're encountering as more people talk to us about this, that I think a lot of people are quick to, infer causation through the correlation. That said, we do think it's going to be a really interesting thing to keep an eye on. One reason, our study design simply wouldn't afford us the opportunity to speak to that. However, I think it is an important thing for us to study in that we simply don't know what the long-term consequences of sort of reliance on this external device in our pocket for searching for information will be. So we would advocate that we need to try and get some funding toward longitudinal studies, for example, where we track people's device usage and see how that relates to their cognition over the long term. Our hunch, though, is that humans are pretty resilient and very adaptive, and that, we don't necessarily want to go with any kind of doomsday thing, because these devices are a huge, huge advantage in many ways. When you think about the types of lazier or cognitive misers that we're talking about that are using it more often, previously they might simply have just went with their gut impression when solving a problem and given an incorrect answer, whereas now, even though they may be acting lazily by allowing their smartphone to do their thinking for them, they're actually probably in some ways more likely to generate correct answers.
Maybe let's talk about the other potential correlations here.
Yeah,
Could
sure.
it be that for some reason analytical thinkers are just less likely to use their smartphones?
Yeah, like I said, one thing is we collected a few different types of measures, and we thought it was interesting that, for example, if it was just a general disinclination, we might have expected the same types of correlations for social media and entertainment usage, but we didn't see that. So I think it seems to be relatively specific to seeking out this sort of information.
And what about, I don't think this was within your study, but I'm just wondering, could there be a difference between using the smartphone for the same reason as you would use the computer, but you use the computer less, it's less mobile?
Yeah, so we actually did ask people about their computer usage, and we find no difference here with smartphone owners. So smartphone owners, we find no relation between their cognition and the extent to which they use search engines on their computer. However, interestingly, for non-smartphone owners, we do find this relation between cognitive style and search engine use on a computer. So in some ways, it seems that people who have the smartphones have sort of advanced in their ability and no longer really rely on the home computer, whereas people who don't have the smartphone, we do find that relation. So that's an interesting sort of wrinkle in our data that we haven't had a chance to talk about much.
So if your study is correct, some people are doing less work to find the answers that they need. Is that bad?
Yeah, and we think it's important to think about both the positive and negative consequences of this. One example I could use that takes it to the extreme is, on one hand, I don't think anyone's really upset that we, for example, could just look up the phone number to our favorite restaurant. We don't really care about memorizing and retaining certain types of information. But on the other extreme, imagine if your surgeon had no knowledge stored in his mind about the procedures that he was operating on you and was just simply looking it up as he went. I think most people would be disconcerted by that kind of offloading of knowledge. Now, in between those two extreme examples, there's all kinds of gray areas where I would say that we simply don't know what the real sort of cost or benefit is going to be in this external reliance on devices. A really interesting thing to me is creativity. To what extent to reason creatively and effectively with knowledge do we need to have it encoded in our mind long term versus being able to just source it externally as we need it? There's all kinds of interesting questions that I think both science needs to explore and society needs to decide in terms of what this optimal trade-off between internal cognitive processing and external reliance on devices is.
I love this research. I'm just wondering, would it make the analytical thinker being able to fact check and look information up on the go? Are they sort of able to use their cognitive processes for other more interesting things rather than converting Fahrenheit to Celsius?
Yeah, certainly. As I said earlier, people range in the extent to which they're what we would call cognitive miser. That is, they want to, prize efficiency over accuracy. And so it always is necessarily sort of a trade-off between ease and efficiency and effort. And so I think that as long as these tools are used appropriately, they're a huge advantage to humankind. If you look at the course of history, people have always relied on external sources for knowledge. For example, you might have a knowledgeable friend in a particular area and you could seek them out and ask their opinion on something. Likewise, people, encyclopedias and reference books were hugely popular throughout the ages. People could go home or go to the library and procure an answer that they might not have available in their own brain. The internet, as Betsy Sparrow showed with her work, really marked a new era in the way that information is accessible. And we would argue that the smartphone is an even bigger step in that direction because now the power of the internet is available more or less anywhere we go. So we really do have this, in essence, it's the sum knowledge of humankind available in our pockets at all times. So, although people, I think, have some reticence about our reliance on these types of devices, I also think it's a massive advance for humanity, too.
Now, you are far more optimistic than the media articles that I'm reading make you sound, because it sounds like doom.
Yeah, no, we definitely are aware of that. Yeah, it's really, I think, more generally for science, it's an interesting kind of lesson for me and sort of how people like to lay their own interpretations over these things. But again, I don't want to say that there won't be any negative consequences either, because these are such a recent addition to our society that we just simply haven't had a chance to track it effectively over time. But, as I said, there's necessarily always positives and negatives with anything, but we certainly most definitely do not want to have everyone throw away their phones either.
Okay, well, if we assume that people are becoming less, and I'm trying not to use something that sounds like a moral judgment, but let's say less effortful in their thinking with heavy smartphone use, and that is a problem, then are you prescribing something perchance?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like I said, we just can't know yet, but we do know that analytic and reflective thinking is extremely important. So even if, say like worst case scenario that there is this trend where people become increasingly lazy in their thinking due to this availability, what we would say is that we really need to prize that reflective thinking, if not for the retrieval and encoding of this information, but the assessment of it as well. So the internet is saturated with information, but how do we know what's valid information, for example? How do we know what to do with these facts that we Google? We need to retain these aspects of our cognition that allow us to think effectively, clearly, and analytically about problems, regardless of whether we decide as a society that offloading some of our knowledge to our phones is okay.
Nathaniel, thanks very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
And we've linked to Nathaniel Barr and the study The Brain in Your Pocket, evidence that smartphones are used to supplant thinking, on our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You can also listen to all of our back episodes or click the links to Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or iTunes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Science for the People. Science for the People is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta. The show is produced by Rochelle Saunders. Ryan Bromsgrove is our promotions manager. Our social media manager is Chelsea Butler. K.O. Myers updates our website. Helen Quivalon is our publishing liaison. Ed Haynes is our guest coordinator. We get research help from Josh Witten. The show is edited by K.O. Myers and Ryan Bromsgrove. Our theme song was written and recorded by Fractal Pattern, and its title is Binary Consequence. The show is hosted by Rochelle Saunders, Marie Claire Shanahan, and me, Desiree Schell.